Hello, everyone. Hi. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you're based. And welcome to the third and final class of this collaborative course between the Center for Constitutional Rights and Into the Treehouse called Rooted, a Living Toolkit in the Face of State Repression. My name is Maya Fino. I'm the Political Education and Research Manager at the Center for Constitutional Rights, aka CCR. And today's class is New Media Studies with our instructor, Afeef Nessouli. On behalf of CCR, it's been such an immense pleasure to be involved in the creation of a course like Rooted. In this moment of mass disinformation, we remain committed to political education, to study, and to curiosity. We hope this monthly space has been a reminder of how critical it is to see yourself as a part of the world around us, as an agent of social change within your own communities. We ask that you take what you learned from this living toolkit and go forth onward towards your people. Thank you for taking the time to learn with us. And with that, I'll now invite Paloma Ray to offer a few words about Into the Treehouse.
Thank you, Maya. Hi, everyone. So, before anything else, I just want to name what tonight is. This is our final class in this chapter of Treehouse and CCR's partnership, and it feels really, really special to be here with all of you. When we started building this back in October, we imagined a space where you didn't have to arrive fully formed, just willing, where curiosity is the rule, not the exception, and where adults get to remember and kids and inner children alike get to teach. Into the Treehouse is the spirit we've brought into this shared vision, a way of approaching this space as a playground, one where we could experiment, tell stories, move our bodies, and find joy, not as escape, but as a way to connect, expand our capacity, and practice liberation together. So, we want to say thank you for your presence, for your play, and for your willingness to show up. And as always, we invite you to stay curious, to try things, be brave, mess up, laugh, and keep showing up to yourselves and to each other. So, welcome one more time into the Treehouse. We're so glad to be here with you. And now I'm going to pass it to Treehouse co founder, Nicole Nimri.
Thank you, Paloma. And thank you, Maya. Thank you to CCR. And thank you, each and every one of you, for joining and just being here because it's so, so special. I want to echo now for the third time. Just thank you for being here and tuning in for the third and last course of our Rooted series. So, we named this series Rooted, a Living Toolkit Against State Repression because we wanted to offer the collective resources that are both helpful and embodied. So even though tonight is the last, is the closing of the series, it's not an ending. This body of work, from the microsite to the worksheets, tools, practices to the course recordings themselves, is built to live beyond this space. And our hope is that it will continue to hold you, inspire you, and recenter you time and time again, to you and to everybody that you share this with. And before I invite our instructor, Afeef, to begin, I want to quickly address some housekeeping things. It's a public class. It will be recorded for viewing later on. The chat won't be. Closed captions are available if you just go to the bottom of your screen and to the right near the chat box. The chat is open. We encourage you to introduce yourself, let us know where you're tuning in from, and be active in the chat as this is how we're going to be dialoguing together. Make sure also when you're chatting that you press the button that says send to everyone, not just hosts and panelists. Otherwise, just us behind the scenes will see it. So you want to make sure that everybody who is here can read your insights also. We also invite you to use the Q&A section for any questions as things tend to go pretty quickly in the chat and might get lost otherwise. Also, yeah, it's just a way for us to kind of keep everything consolidated in one place. And the last note that I'll share is that we want to iterate that curiosity is always welcome, but hatred is not. We have a zero tolerance policy for intolerance, and we will move accordingly. But without further ado, I'm going to let Afeef introduce himself and take it from here. Thank
Great.
you.
Thank you all for just having me here and just inviting me into this space and getting to sort of have the opportunity to talk about my own living toolkit in the face of state repression. So, in this class, I really wanted to do, oh, sorry. I wanted to do something that really represents what my year has been like. It's been really about lessons about making media to help people, if I'm being honest. This last year, I went to Syria. I was covering right-wing rebels who took down Bashar al-Assad in December of 2024. I also covered queer people in Gaza, and then I went as a humanitarian aid worker there. I spent several months covering the war in Beirut. I've just come back. So this course, what I'm going to do tonight is really to talk about how to tell the dignified truth and make media that solves problems, because I really believe that's the thing we need to do in the face of state repression. Just to give you a little bit of background, which I kind of mentioned it. I'm a journalist. I host a space online, which is called With Afeef Nessouli. I also report for The Intercept. I previously worked for Spotify and The Wall Street Journal, The Daily Show with Trevor Noah, and CNN. I focus on queer and Arab stories. I also spent 9 weeks in Gaza as a humanitarian aid worker in 2025, and I just recently, a few weeks ago, got back from covering the war in Beirut. Uh, this is really where we'll be going, but really what I want to do before we get started is to sort of have a grounding moment and have a definition of terms that I might be using or things that really will help you understand what I mean. So, propaganda, what is that? It's the systematic, organized dissemination of information, ideas, or rumors that are often biased, misleading, or emotionally charged. They influence opinions, attitudes, and behaviors on a mass scale. And if you're here, you're probably already familiar with the Israeli and American sort of flavor of propaganda. Manufacturing consent, something I think is really an interesting concept. It's a theory that mass media manipulates public opinion by framing news to support elite corporate and government interests. It's coined by Walter Lippmann, and it was popularized by Noam Chomsky and Edward Herman in the 80s. It suggests that in democracies, consent is engineered through propaganda, media ownership, and ideological filters rather than direct coercion. And then two more, dehumanization. That's the psychological and social process of perceiving or treating individuals or groups as less than human, stripping them of human qualities, dignity, and individuality. It involves denying others' mental capacities and their emotions and their moral status. It's often about reducing them to animals, objects, or machines to justify violence or discrimination or prejudice against them. And finally, Western media bias, which is something that I think we all can recognize and are getting more awake to. It's the tendency for news outlets in the US and Europe to act like we're the main characters of the world. It's the idea that the news is written through a lens that assumes Western values, politics, and lifestyles are the default or the correct way to be. It means we often don't listen to indigenous storytellers or witnesses, and we favor people that make sense to us and to us when we're making sense of the world. And that's just a few terms. There's going to be more. We can get into them a little more during the question and answer. Um, okay, so this is Saleh. Saleh is a friend of mine that I met 10 years ago. He's also a journalist. He comes from somewhere called Yarmouk refugee camp in Syria. It's sort of in Damascus. It's a huge place that's been destroyed. And in the last 10 years, I've worked with Saleh around Lebanon. But in the last couple of years, he's really told me a lot about his life growing up in Yarmouk refugee camp. Um, Yarmouk was hard for Saleh. He grew up sort of in the middle of extreme violence, violence that was not known to the world, violence that was being enacted by Bashar al-Assad, which was a dictator of Syria, who fell in 2024. Saleh escaped Yarmouk in 2014 as a 14-year-old. He was born in 2000. So when he was around 12, the civil war started to really ramp up. And that meant that people like ISIS, like organizations like ISIS who were resisting Bashar al-Assad, were growing and actually taking really a lot of shape in his own neighborhood. In fact, he was very much affected by all of the different groups fighting each other. It wasn't just two groups. It wasn't just one versus, the state. It was many groups at once fighting each other. And the destruction in Yarmouk is really, really pervasive. I'm not going to show you pictures of it because it's unnecessary, but it looks a lot like Gaza. And it's been like that since the mid 2000s, but we just didn't know about it. So I spent a week in the Yarmouk refugee camp in Damascus, Syria, and I observed the lives of residents who lived or hailed from there in a loose, sort of informal family. This was Saleh's family. He invited me to sort of cover what was going on in Yarmouk, and I did that before I was really pitching a story. I really just wanted to go and sort of embed and really understand from a personal level what they were going through. I met Salwa, a single young woman. She was barely out of adolescence. She's like early 20s, 22, and she happens to be responsible for a bunch of babies who were dropped off at her door by a mom who couldn't, someone she was related to that just like literally couldn't take care of them because of various reasons. You're growing up in a war zone that is demolished, like there is literally no infrastructure. Um, and you end up having a lot of people who are addicted to painkillers. You have a lot of people who are in danger all the time and they want, family to take care of their babies. So this 22-year-old is now taking care of babies. I met a guy named Bilal. He's a young man who wants to build houses, but can only find work dealing hashish. He really can only deal it inconsistently. And then I met Abu Tariq, a person who actually was in an offshoot of ISIS, and who later became a fighter in something called HTS, which was the group that eventually took down Assad. All of their names have been altered to protect them. But the point of what I'm trying to tell you is that I spent time with these people to understand what was going on before I reported on it, right? The whole point of reporting to me is to figure out who are the people that are solving problems and stepping up and trying to make life better. And personally, I really started to take to Salwa. She has a 13-year-old sister who lives with her. She has another sister who lives with her, and then she has two babies that live with her. And she would go to UNRWA and try to make odd jobs. She would she was a really compelling character. She's this young woman who would sort of be foul-mouthed and aggressive against any sort of really right-wing, like extremist in the neighborhood. She would just sort of in our interviews together, she would tell me that she was just the type of woman and that was really representative of Syrian women. She would never really bend backwards for a man, no matter how powerful or scary they seemed. And as the more right-wing factions of Syria were taking over, this became a real reality that we were living through together. Um, so ultimately, I just spent, a lot of time with these people. And I think the most important part of this story was that, you know, in getting to know Salwa, I started to write her story down. I started to really go into the details. I really started to try to understand her as a human, and she was really open to that. She told me, I remember saying, she said something along the lines of, you know, I like you a lot more than Syrian journalists, and I like you a lot more than Western journalists because I'm sort of in the middle. She said, you kind of understand a little bit about what's going on in Syria, so I don't have to like catch you up. And she's like, but you don't have any like biases against me or against what's supposed to be happening here. You're just listening. And I felt really like proud of that because I did just want to listen, really. And eventually, I I wanted I want to say something that I think is really controversial in the journalism world. It's like, why are we telling the stories we tell? What's the point of telling Selwa's story, going into her world and getting all these facts out and then extracting all this information? The point for me has always been to help the sources that I keep, right? It's always been upfront. It's always why I've had to leave mainstream media because to me, if you're going to cover someone who's 22 who's taking care of babies, um, you better be doing it in a way that is humanizing them so that when people understand their story, they can reach out and sort of help them. Because Selwa is in her own way a resistance. She's a part of the resistance. She's resisting the patriarchy. She's also resisting the forced poverty. She's resisting giving up. She's resisting the idea that like children shouldn't have someone taking care of them when they need them most. What ended up happening with Salwa was that I wrote her story and all of these other people's stories and published it in The Intercept with all of their permission, of course. And I blurred out their faces, I changed their names, and what ended up happening was several people got in touch with me because they wanted to help Salwa. And that was the whole point to me, which is what ended up happening was someone eventually like sent her enough money for her to buy a whole solar system panel, which gave her electricity, which has changed her life considerably. I'm still in touch with her. I'm still in touch with all of these people, and I'm just saying all of this to say that like I learned in that story at the beginning of I think it was sort of in the last 2 years, uh, and in the last year more specifically when this actually was published, that I want to have a part of my work is about movement journalism. It's about trying to make a difference. So I followed my friend Saleh to see his family, and I met a bunch of really amazing, important people. And the journalism ended up helping one of them a lot, the one that needed the help the most, to be honest. And that was the point for me. And I think that I want to advocate for telling stories for a reason. And so that kind of brings me to the next person in chronology. So what happened a couple of months after that, I came back from Syria. I eventually started sort of in my work, I had always been sort of working with queer people in Gaza, either evacuating them or trying to understand their stories and advocate for their medical health care or just generally their lives. And that wasn't just queer people, it was all sorts of people. But in having a connection to a couple queer people and putting that online anonymously, someone named ES reached out to me on Facebook one day. And I believe this was March 2024. So, I had been in yeah, I think it was March 2024 that I get a message from ES on Facebook. And it's really random because I don't use Facebook at all. And it's so random that I actually like followed up and kind of understood where he was coming from. It's just it was wonderful that I had seen the message to begin with, is what I mean. He basically left me a voice note basically saying something along the lines of, I heard about your work. I've seen your work on Instagram. I just want you to know that I'm queer and I live in Gaza too. And it was really like sort of this un it was like he wasn't asking for anything. He just wanted for documentation's sake, for posterity's sake, to let me know that there was more queer people in Gaza, and that actually he didn't know about that many queer people in Gaza until he saw some of the stuff I had been posting on Instagram with other queer people in Gaza, whether it was their like voice notes that were like altered or their stories. And he basically eventually told me that he was running out of medication and that he was an HIV positive patient and that he had neurosyphilis and that he was on a walker and that he had about 2 months left of HIV medication. And of course, he, I noticed that when people really need help, they don't actually ask for it. It's a lot of the people that don't need as much help that ask for it more quickly. And he basically just sort of mentioned his dilemma in passing. And it was clear to me that he was in a really precarious situation. Like the depots in Gaza were being destroyed. So all of the medication, it didn't matter whether it was HIV in Gaza or if it was cancer treatment or if it was some other, you know, arthritis medication. Like depots full of medication were being destroyed at a rate, at a clip. And to get the medication that was actually being administered by the quote unquote Hamas run Ministry of Health in Gaza. He was getting medication, but it was always kind of touch and go. Like he didn't think that there would be any more left. And they would always tell him that. They'd say, listen, like we have this month, like we have 3 months supply, check it in about 2.5 months because we might have more. There's blockades, there's a surplus, but there's also other people in Gaza who have HIV. So it's kind of one of these things that he just was really scared. And, as I got to know him, his fear was becoming more and more readily expressed. And on top of him just having HIV, he was on a walker. Like I said, his HIV had been such a controversial topic to him in Gaza that he really didn't get care for a while because he was too afraid to tell anyone. He was too afraid about what his parents would say, about what the society would say. And so he waited a really long time, and it developed into something called neurosyphilis. So on top of having HIV, running out of medication, this man is on a walker in rubble torn, like war-torn Gaza. He can't do PT, he can't do anything. Um, so eventually I start advocating for him online, writing his story, doing interviews with him, changing his name, changing his voice, just letting out information to people and asking, can anyone help? One day I get an email from an organization called GLIA. GLIA is an organization it's a medical organization that's been in an active advocacy role on the ground in Gaza since the early 2000s, or maybe I think 2011 actually. So, and maybe earlier, to be honest, because these things kind of get established, but they had been sort of organized before that. So the director of GLIA named Tariq Lubani emails me and he's like, I've heard about what you're saying on Instagram about your source. I want to help. I have an organization in Gaza who runs medical convoys, medications up to people in the north all the time. One other added layer was that ES was in the north. The north, it was at the time extremely dangerous. I mean, everywhere in Gaza became extremely dangerous in the end, but being in Tel El Hawa and in Gaza City basically meant that like everything was precarious. He was watching people die from outside of his window. His brother, to get a medication, would have to like brave the streets between snipers, etc. It was harrowing, and ES couldn't get the medication on his own, but he was supported by a mom and a brother who were around. So in many ways, he lived abundantly compared to many people there. Um, and eventually, Tariq Lubani, after failing 1,000 times because it was so hard to get medication into Gaza, the right medication, which is a special cocktail for ES because of just his blood work and what that entailed was an added layer of complication. But eventually, Tariq Lubani, after months of at one point, I think GLIA was even banned at some point, so they only had like local doctors working on these cases, but often they had foreigners coming in and out to help medication get in secretly. They succeeded after months of getting turned around, getting rejected, getting in trouble. I mean, it happened. Like so many things happened, but Tariq is just an amazing Palestinian Canadian man and made it happen. And I don't know, I know you guys know Wizard Bisan. Bisan was a part of the convoy. She and ES took a picture, and they had successfully gotten medication up to him. But this was just one time. He needs more. ES continued to get more medication as the months went by, but he's still in a precarious situation. He still is really struggling from all of the things that happened in Gaza. For instance, his house was struck, his cats have died. He still needs help constantly refilling his medication. He has mental health struggles, of course, beyond just having being in a genocide. He's in a genocide with a disease that is literally like a countdown clock, and it feels like he's always on edge of just losing grip on his health. But ultimately he got his medication, and I think that moment made me understand that movement journalism and is about leaning on the collective. It's about screaming into the world what is going on and making sure that people understand what's going on through the skill of storytelling, through amplifying the voice of the person themselves. I would put his quotes, I would put his voice, I would change his voice, but I would put his voice, um, and I would make sure that he was telling his own story. Because when you tell your own story, you know all the details. You're humanizing yourself. Like, I don't have to go and do all this work to humanize a person. They can just humanize themselves. And in his rendition of his story, people were really listening. They were able to hear him. And and I think that was ultimately the reason why he's now set up with GLIA. He's now, set up with different medical. In the end, what has not been solved is his regular access to medication. Although he has had medication regularly, there are still depots being bombed. Is still blockades on Gaza, but he has an entire community now of people that know him and who didn't before. And it was because he had the courage to say, hey, I exist. I exist and I'm important. And that was his resistance. And my resistance was hearing him and trying to use my platform and my skill sets, whether it was just editing or knowing what should come first, how to tell a story, to get him sorted in a society of people who would be really willing to help him if they just knew he existed. Um, and so what ended up happening was I eventually, we got him. This is pictures of. I'm sorry that I've been a little slow on the slideshow, but this is the medication he takes. This is him taking a picture of himself on his walker in Gaza. And ultimately now he's set up with Glia, which is great because it just means that he has people to WhatsApp, people to send voice notes to, doctors that are on the ground. And whenever they are slow with him, he sends me a voice note and I start, screaming at them. But what ended up happening was Glia eventually wrote to me and said, "Hey, Afeef, would you like to come to Gaza with us as a humanitarian aid worker? You already logistically coordinated a whole medication convoy. Maybe you can help us do that more and kind of come and teach us how to advocate for storytelling so that we can just coordinate our really powerful doctors, our powerful nurses, all of these amazing people that should really tell their stories." And so I go to Gaza and I'm there for 9 weeks. I get in, we are absolutely shocked that I get in. Like I've been, talking my smack online for months before that. And ultimately I get greenlit. I get in while the ceasefire gets broken. It's extremely horrifying. Bombs and explosions are every corner, every second. I hear them, experience them. I see people in ways that I never experienced before. I saw people on the edge of death. I saw people who died. I experienced things that were unfathomable and cruel. But what was the point of me going if not to witness and to help people who need medication, who need advocacy? Ultimately, what I really want to do before I go on is say that like all of this is not just my work. It's a collective. It's holding hands with people you trust and you believe will have the same values as you and working together in a coordinated fashion to get something done. Journalism is important, but it's only important if it changes the material reality of the people that we are trying to cover. Otherwise, it's just entertainment, and that's what it has become. And so in this moment, I'm trying to do whatever I can and teaching this class and doing whatever I can other than teaching this class to advocate for the idea that journalism needs to be more active. It needs to be more radical. We need to normalize the radicalism that comes with helping people because it shouldn't be radical to help people. It shouldn't be radical to say, hey, the whole point of this journalism is to put someone ahead of me, like to amplify someone else, to amplify the person who is either problem solving or who needs help or who is witnessing something that is an atrocity. So I reported from Gaza from March 27th to early June of 2025. I was there for 9 weeks. And while I was there, I think the most important thing that I did was that I was able to observe the famine itself. I lost 12 pounds. I often didn't have something very like wholesome to eat. And I was the most literal privileged person that could possibly be in Gaza because I was a humanitarian aid worker with an organization. Like there was no one who was more privileged than us. And still, we were often limited in what we could access because there was nothing on the market sometimes. Or sometimes, it was so expensive to get food that it was just easier to eat a can of beets, which I did. And I'm a Taurus. It was my birthday recently. I'm an eater. So this was hard. It was something about learning about how much privilege I've had in my life and how normalized I've had such privilege, how much I've normalized access to whatever I want. And getting checked that way made me understand things about the genocide that I don't think I could have experienced without being there. And I think one of the most important things that I did was talk about this famine and give examples and take footage and amplify people's stories of being shot at the, humanitarian fund that was set up by Israel and America to, you know, feed people. But I don't know if you guys remember that, but there was the GHF that was sort of CIA kind of constructed in Gaza, and all it really did was put people in more danger than they were before they set this sort of humanitarian aid like structure up that was like American and Israeli. And what I was able to do was write a report on that and explain it from being on the ground. Now, there are Palestinians there already, but just like I said before, oftentimes Western bias is that because I'm American, because I speak English, and because I'm also an Arabic speaker, I can be a bridge of information. And so I was trying to be primarily an advocate and a humanitarian aid worker, but often when Al Jazeera or Vibe Check or whatever podcast or television outlet would ask me to come on, I would try to do my best to amplify the people that I was around who wouldn't have that opportunity because they didn't speak English and they couldn't just advocate for themselves on such a mass scale in the same way. And what that looked like was telling them about my friend Basil Lehia, who you can see on the right-hand side. He was someone that I worked with, I volunteered with. He was a volunteer at a soup kitchen. You can see how much weight he lost. OCHA had reported at that time 100% of the population in Gaza was basically facing high levels of acute food insecurity. You can see that on Basil's body structure. That was you can see on the slide it says that Basil is on the left July 17th, 2023. That's what he looked like on July 17th, 2023. And then 2 years later, on July 12th of 2025, he sent me that picture, which is on the right. He had lost 37 kilos, which basically, I think he went from like 247 pounds to like 165 pounds or something like that. He was gaunt. He lost so much of his body weight, so much of his spirit just by being hungry. Um, and it was important to be able to be there to give the detail of what Bassett had experienced. But he wasn't the only person. He's just an example I'm giving now. On the left-hand side, you can see where people are crowded to get food. On that day, on the left-hand side of the, you see a picture of a crowd of people. There are shots going off into that crowd. That just witnessing the fact that that happened and being able to say that really made me feel like incredibly, I don't know how to say this in any other way, but it was like I had the truth. And no matter what anyone said, it was like you can't deny what I've seen and what I experienced. And that made me feel powerful in going and advocating because it stopped being theoretical and it started being like I lived this experience, I'm embodying this experience. And the whole point of that is to witness this so that I can be more powerful in my advocacy. So, as I said, what's the point? Why am I going to Gaza? What's the point? I think ultimately it was to amplify people like GLIA, organizations like GLIA, who are getting those convoys up to people, specifically treating them, doing whatever they could. They were doing 3D printed, they were 3D printing their own medical supplies in Gaza so that they didn't have to any longer try to get medical sort of supplies in. They were 3D printing like walkers and all sorts of just like devices that you need to use in all sorts of medical issue situations, whether it's like, machines or, equipment. And then I also did a lot of volunteering at a place called Shabab Gaza. Shabab Gaza is a community kitchen. They were delivering food to red zones. They were the ones that were really resisting this famine. And I thought, what better than to work with them, show what they do, and really raise money by being physically there and saying, hey, this is this organization that exists, totally verified. I'm here. I'm doing the work with them. I know the people who run this organization, and they're doing really good work. They're the only ones that are going into red zones and like braving incredible danger to get a meal to old people, children, all sorts of people who are starving. Um, and I think the point for me has always been, as I keep reiterating, is to report on people like this so that we can help them, so that we can say, hey, there's actually not just a victim story here. Like ES isn't just some victim of his circumstances. He's actually a radical, resistant, queer person who's saying, I exist and I matter. Come help me. Shabab Ghaza, they're not just victims of the circumstances of Zionist violence. They're also resistors of that violence. They are willing to try to get to the farms, get the whatever's left and prepare these meals that really save lives. Like people were not getting calories and they were sourcing calories from, figuring out where things were, bringing them to a kitchen and preparing meals that like people who are intense and who are disabled and who are grieving and who are just completely bereft of what they used to have are not capable of doing. Um, but there are people always who are powerful and strong. And I think part of movement journalism isn't just about, you know, talking about the atrocities and talking about the damage and the rubble. It's about really exalting those in the oppressed group that are actually kind of surfacing as the leaders and the heroes. Because if we don't come around and sort of collectively celebrate those people have no chance of growing into leaders that can change the situation. And I think that has been a big problem in covering Gaza, uh, is that we kind of look at it as only the saddest of stories, which it is, but it also is a story where people are incredible and they're using their powerful incredibleness to change their neighbors and their families and their friends' lives, even they're probably the guy down the road that you hated your whole life is now someone you're cooking for because that's what is being asked of you in such a time of selflessness. And I think it was just so mind altering and mind numbing to experience that I wanted to spend my movement journalism on saying, we can all be a little more like them. We're not all perfect, but we have a lot more work to do than screaming online. We can all take up a little bit more space in the world of advocating and in the world of movement towards justice and liberation. And I think a lot of that is a lot of discomfort. I mean, I was uncomfortable as hell, like in Gaza. Like that was not an easy experience. And every minute that I was getting let in, I was wondering whether I should even be doing what I was doing because it was so dangerous. Um, the last real story I want to talk about is my experience in the last couple of months. I left Gaza. I went on many news channels to explain these things that I'm trying to speak of right now. And, ultimately, what was the point of Gaza? I again want to say, like, Glia got a lot of money from just the short time I was there, only because I knew how to do Instagram and sort of amplify their doctors, amplify their nurses, amplify the logistics coordinators that were doing all of their work. I was able to amplify the ES's story and get him really trusted advocates that were queer in New York City who are like very, very, very sure that I was very sure that they would always sort of have his back, be a part of his community, to extend his community. And then Shabeb Gaza as well, the community kitchen, they also got thousands of dollars from just the fact that, you teach them how to make videos for themselves. And now all of them are making videos about the thing that they're doing. And it's a collective practice of working together to do something that is useful, right? I know it sounds obvious, but you've got to be useful. What's the point of doing all of this work if it's not materially changing people's lives? And so again, this is all just to say that the last story I want to talk about is, I went with my friend to Syria. I followed my source into Gaza, and then I was caught in Beirut because, Beirut's my city. I love it more than life. And I was there when the war broke out, and there was this duty to report while I was also experiencing bombs, but also grief, a deep grief, a grief that I thought I understood with Syria and what I thought I understood with Palestine, because I so deeply identify with those cultures as my own, because in many ways Bilad Hashem is one place. But Beirut is my city, and experiencing the war and the destruction there was hard. It was hard in a way that shifted my strength, to be frank. Um, I was about 600, sorry, a few hundred meters away from the southern suburbs. I was renting an apartment this time around for the last few months, reporting for The Intercept on something completely different. When the war broke out, it was March 1st. I was on February 28th, Iran's supreme leader was assassinated by the US and Israel. And by March 1st, the political resistance movement, Hezbollah, um, invited journalists to the southern suburbs. It was before the war in Lebanon broke out, literally the day of. They invited all of the journalists to sort of cover this huge public funeral mourning procession for the Iranian supreme leader, who all of the members of Hezbollah really greatly respect and think of as their leader. And so there were thousands of Hezbollah supporters and fighters and just all sorts of political leadership of that group that were in the southern suburbs mourning. And so we were covering all of this stuff. And it was it was a moment where I knew the energy had shifted a bit. And that night, 12 hours later, I was there about 4 p.m. in the afternoon. By 12 hours later, the southern suburbs were completely bombed. People were displaced. People were running for their lives. I had woken up to just huge explosions that were hundreds of meters away from me. I had a huge nosebleed. It was terrifying. And I immediately started reporting on something that was actively happening. I went on my balcony and I started seeing people in motorcycles just in droves driving out of the southern suburbs. I happened to be on the one street that connects the southern suburbs, like to get out of the southern suburbs. So you can see this picture is right outside of my apartment. There was hundreds of tents of people displaced from the southern suburbs and from the south of the country. It became almost 1 in 5 people, over 1 million people, 1,200,000 people are displaced at this moment. Thousands of people have been killed, hundreds of kids have been killed. And this is this is a montage of things I want to get into. Basically, on the upper left hand where you see the blue, I spoke to a resistance fighter who was running a school that turned into a shelter. He told me he was really disappointed in the government and the lack of assistance he felt was happening from the government. There were hundreds of families in that building. They were smoking hookah in the corridors and screaming and running, and they were obviously horrified, but they were trying to make the best that they could with what they had. I just experienced Lebanese people helping Lebanese people in so many ways as the weeks sort of drew on. A few days after I had experienced this shelter, I was displaced myself. I had to walk 4 miles because they were bombing right outside of my house. And I had to quickly pack a bag. My friends were screaming and calling me to get the hell out. And I packed a bag, and within minutes I had to take to the streets. I thought, you think you're going to take a car or drive or do whatever, but it was packed. I was, just had to walk for 4.5 miles to get to my friend's house in the northwest of the city. So a lot of things happened. And one of the things that happened also was you can see that there's a picture of food here. I eventually wanted to, do the thing that I love to do, which is find the helpers and amplify their work. So I started reporting on that school that was in Ras Beirut, that was converted into a shelter. I started reporting on this group called Truth Be Told that was, you see this food here. They were packing about 1,000 meals a day. Somehow, a young woman basically did an emergency response initiative within a day of everything happening, and somehow figured out through coordination. She was very experienced. She's done this before in past wars and past displacement issues, where she was getting 1,000 meals prepared and passing them out all around Hosh Beirut, which is a park where you saw this exact picture of this tent. We would basically pass out 1,000 meals, nearly upwards of 1,000 meals. If you move to the right, this like Instagram live and me and a woman named Hanan. Hanan was also someone who was really helping people. She was helping her family. She is an art student that moved to Lebanon. She's a Lebanese American art student that was living in the East Side, kind of an upper class, francophonic, rich neighborhood where a lot of us tourists and foreigners go to have fun, restaurants, all of that stuff. Her family's from the South. They basically got evacuated and their houses were destroyed, and they took 2 days to get to her house in the eastern side of the city of Beirut. They were sleeping in their cars. There was traffic. Some of them brought more stuff than others. And she packed in 12 people in her two-bedroom apartment. And she just told me the story on Instagram Live. I continued to report on all of these people for The Intercept. Those kind of links, all of those links will be shared with you. If you go to the center of the screen, you see these little boots. I actually experienced, I had been following a place called Mosaic. Mosaic is a queer organization that really helps with group therapy and therapy, one-on-one therapy. In the war, with all of this displacement, of course, there are queer people who are displaced, too. They can't just go to shelters like the ones run by the resistance fighters because they're presenting queer and they just don't feel safe. They don't feel like it's easy to like live in a wartime situation with people who are at their very most distressed. They really want to feel like they're around their community, which they're usually around during non-war time. So Mosaic ended up buying a couple of apartments, this organization, through like the goodwill of other people, of grants and people donating. And they didn't buy them. They rented two apartments and they converted them to shelters. I went to that shelter. I have a video on my Instagram if you ever want to see it. I can show you a bit of it in a second. Um, and I spoke to trans women in their 20s who, some of them hailed from Syria and had been displaced several times. Some of them were Lebanese and had been displaced for the first time. And they told me about their stories. And it was important because, people forget that there are marginalized communities, not just queer people, but, all of the migrant workers, all of these people don't quite want to be displaced with people who are right wing or people who are just not very open to their way of life. Now, not everyone is like that, of course, but it's just one of those things where like life is layered. Like when war is happening, you still have to recognize the fact that there are marginalized communities that don't just live in with such ease. And well, not that anyone's living with ease, but they're living with even harder circumstances because they're not accepted in society. And the last picture is just me preparing a salad, and they made me do a video for the organization. And I think that's part of the advocacy, just looking silly and putting your hands and digging in and rolling your sleeves up and actually doing something. So this is a little bit of the video I made, and I'm just going to play like a minute of it before you can sort of find this on your own.
Although there's a ceasefire between the US, Israel, and Iran, Lebanon has been explicitly excluded from this. Israel struck the country with over 100 missiles in just 10 minutes. Because of the over 1 million people that are displaced in Lebanon right now, one local queer organization called Mosaic turned itself into a shelter in Beirut. The shelter currently houses queer people who are now homeless because of Israel's massive strikes on their neighborhoods. Here's the director of the organization, Bashara, telling me what's going on.
We already started this year, but we got some we got back with what is it saying? So far we have the shelter that's full. We're working on opening a new shelter as well. Yeah. But where's the first shelter? Here. It's just across. Yes. So we're gonna try to take the first floor as well to keep it like within the same building.
Mosaic has been open since 2014 and is a resource for queer people in Lebanon.
So basically, Mosaic is an LGBTIQ+ led organization for the LGBTIQ+ people and communities that was founded in 2014. Initially, it started and still provides mental health support. So we do one-on-one therapy, and we also have group therapies as well.
In fact, I met with the new director of the organization while reporting for The Intercept a couple of months ago. When we first talked, the discussion was about Trump's USAID funding cuts and the fact that the organization was about to shut down from financial pressure. They were afraid they'd shut down services because there just wasn't enough money. On top of that, the political will seemed to have dried up now that MAGA culture had taken control of the US government. In a normal year, the director says, there would probably be enough money to at least open up another shelter. But now that the US-funded Zionists are bombing throughout Lebanon and USAID money has dried up, Mosaic has to step in as a much-needed displacement shelter without having very many resources. but opening queer-only shelters is absolutely necessary. The director told me that queer-presenting people who are displaced right now don't feel safe going to other converted schools or stadiums popping up around the country.
How are you getting in touch with all these people and how are they knowing this? Certain helpline. So basically, for the help I understood was
The fact is that queer people are also among those living in the southern suburbs of Beirut and other parts of the country that have been bombed. And Mosaic is only one of a handful of queer organizations in the country. After we walked across the hall, three young trans women in their 20s decided they didn't mind showing me around their new apartment.
بس كان بدي اشوف الغرف. It's okay. هاي المطبخ. Yes.
Okay, I'm going to stop it there. The point of me showing that to you is because what am I doing with all of these stories? I wanted to build my own space. I just don't think that these things are being properly covered anywhere else. And I think amplifying real people, letting them tell their own stories, letting them take the mic, letting them really challenge our notions of what is even, I guess, normal and what is even going on and the binaries we live in and challenging those binaries helps really fill in the gaps of how to help. Like when you learn about real people and you learn about the things that are being suppressed, you realize it's because the complications of telling someone's story makes things a little rough and wonky, and editors in mainstream media will cut that stuff and they'll be like, ah, it's too much. I remember someone came up to me the other day. They saw me at an event and they said, do you remember a few years ago you were producing something, you had been like tapped? And I was like, for a Disney Plus National Geographic like episode of something on Lebanon, someone had gotten in touch with me. I took these huge reporters, I'm not going to name them, to a drag, like a what do you call it? Like a collective living space for drag queens in Beirut. And they like interviewed this kid who came from a family who was supportive of Hezbollah and he was a drag queen and he gave them the best story ever. The producer was like, I wanted that story to go on the episode so badly, but they cut it at the last second. And I'm just telling you, of course they cut it. Like I knew it from the beginning. I literally set it up because I was like, let's see if they'll actually do it. I'm not going to do some easy story. I'm not trying to get credit. I'm sure they're going to cut my work out, but it's better to get cut and have that producer know it exists because that producer still is in the news and she's still sort of following and advocating for my stuff because she knows about it. And that kid was able to tell his story to a lot of people. And, because Disney just wanted to cut it because it wasn't, easy and simple, they did. But now I have my own space. It's called With Afeef Nessouli. The show that I have is going to be, I do video packages like the one I showed you. I'd amplify stories about journalists, sources, stepping up and creating power so that we have an antidote to like propaganda and all of this doom and gloom. There has to be a way for us to coordinate each other, come together, and actually resist, like in a literal sense, in a way that is useful. So, starting in May, I hope you all tune in. I'll be going live on a weekly basis to cover suppressed news, and I'll continue to advocate by putting out videos about people who I think are worth following. You can join my Patreon. You can go to withafeefnessouli.com. There's all sorts of ways you can support me. You can also support me with not financially at all. I just really want you to see these people. I think it means the world to me to have some capacity to just give these people any sort of help. Like it really makes me feel dutiful. It makes me feel like my life is worth living. So please watch. That's all I can really, ask for. And now I will open it up to questions. Hopefully this is the right time. Let's see.
I think also I'm gonna kind of let folks like really
Just chew on
we
this.
marinated and like really I think we're
Yeah,
enthralled in your storytelling truly. So I kind of want to give folks just a second to just like think
sure.
about um maybe what they want to ask. And oh, here we go. And I also, we have some questions for you that while folks think is um how do we spot propaganda? Like, is there like kind of some some tricks that we can think about, and like what sources do we trust, and like um yeah, I don't know. I'm wondering if you can kind of speak to how to become more media literate and just be able to spot propaganda easier.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I think it's really difficult in this day and age because we're so corporate and capitalized, and things that are, that have heavy investment can sound so real and good. I think what it comes down to is an assortment is it's about having good hygiene. It's about understanding that you can find out about a story from many sources. Um, Seeing how close the storyteller is to the, sorry, there's so much. I'm in Mexico City right now. It's very loud outside. Um, it's 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 about how close to the story the storyteller is. Are they amplifying real voices? Are the voices saying things that are kind of challenging each other? Is there enough space for complication, for complexity? Is there just, because if there isn't, then that's usually propaganda. If you're saying like one side is completely devoid of fault, they're perfect, they have no flaws whatsoever, it's probably propaganda. I mean, there is obvious binaries like a genocide where you're like, well, one group is literally doing this to another group. And here are all of these extremely well reported facts. It's about thinking about whether the facts have been reported by one or more sources, thinking about how, like, what is the reason behind reporting these kinds of things? Like, a part of everything has a bias, and I think bias is okay. I think, do people name their bias? Like, am I trying to amplify queer people because I want people to know about queer people? Yeah, that's my bias. I want you to know that queer people exist. And I also want you to like be challenged by the idea that like the Arab story isn't queer sometimes, because it is. Like it's really about being able to like sit with the information and know that there's enough room for complexity, there's enough room for challenge, there's a lot of sources, and ultimately it's not it's not bad to have a bias. It's bad to have a bias that erases other people. I think when you're left with erasure in a story, um, and there's no giving room for maybe a challenging perspective, then you're not really telling a story. You're just like making something up. I think someone has asked,
Opa.
let's see.
Yes, somebody also in the chat before things get too lost in the
Mhm.
shuffle is someone's asking, with a nonprofit 501(c)(3), how do you select the helpers that you amplify? Do you only focus on a few social causes, or do you take all social causes and amplify? So I'm sure it's impossible to kind of choose
Impossible to do the
everything.
latter. Yeah.
Yeah, it's all interconnected, but yeah, I'm wondering how
Yeah,
you
no, it's a
choose
good
how to
question.
prioritize.
As a reporter, it's more about spending tons of time. I'm like against parachute journalism. I think I spent tons of time with that family in Syria, two different kinds of trips there. I spent 9 weeks in Gaza before years in Gaza before I started talking about people there. Um, it it's about taking your time and actually going on the ground with them, and doing the work yourself, because it's not necessarily the only way to do that. But I think for me personally, if I'm going to have such a high level of trust and I'm going to only be able to amplify so many people, it's going to be the people that I've worked alongside, whether it was in Beirut or it was with Salwa in Syria or it was in with Glia. I can confidently report on them because I confidently that's what reporting is. It's like I spent tons of time with them and I was able to really really be able to tell the details of a story. If I'm exalting or amplifying a group that I haven't worked with, am I telling a story that's real or am I making something up? And that's kind of what I'm getting at, is like you don't want to make stuff up. You want to be able to tell what you experienced, what the real truth is. And so that does limit how many people I get to work with, but it also means that the people I do amplify get to enjoy a lot of detail in their story, a lot of like care goes into their story. And a lot of times it comes down to geography, it comes down to circumstances, it comes down to how far along they are in their capacity to help people, because there does have to be a story. They have to be doing something with a beginning, middle, and end so that I can tell a story or have them tell their own story with a beginning, middle, and end. It won't really help if they're done, or they're not doing anything on the ground now, or if they're not there yet, right? It does take a bit of maturation in the actual organization.
Mm. Someone's asking if you could repeat what you said about journalism needing action. Or maybe I think it was around the part when you were mentioning that journalism needs to be radical in that it really materially supports people.
Yeah, I just think we've been bought by corporations who have an agenda that are not real, like really human. I think this is all intrinsic to I think we all kind of understand. And I think the more we don't believe we understand, the more we're kind of like buying into propaganda. I think journalism has to be radical. And I say the word radical because of the circumstances we're in. I don't think it's very radical to help people. I don't think it's very radical to tell stories and help people. I do think you have to be objective. And I do think helping people does does throw me into a vibration of advocacy, which is fine in my opinion when it is a genocide, when it is a transition, when people are really struggling. You know, I think a part of that is radical because most journalists who are looking to have a really big career don't want to be painted as untrustworthy. And I think what it has done is it has made journalism almost meaningless. Not all journalism. A lot of journalism is amazing, but I just mean the thrust of where we're at in mainstream media, it's being taken over by AI, it's being taken over by so much, is that it's like more about getting money. It's more about serving bottom lines for large conglomerates, oligopolies. And I think when you strip that all away and you do your own thing, your instincts take over and you're like, why am I doing this? What's the whole point of doing this? And I think a lot of independent journalists are really good to follow because they strip themselves from all of these like hardcore pressures of meeting an editor's standards or meeting like some executive standards of what a good story is. It's like they don't care about the person who's at the other end of the story. They care about what the audience is going to eat up and pay for. And I think that they miss the fact that the audience is now becoming sophisticated and has grown and has become awakened to injustices that need to be corrected. And I just think that this is the time for the independent journalist. And I think radicalism is now becoming more and more normal. And I hope to be one of those people that helps you feel that way, that you feel like this should be normal.
Someone asked a really great question here. Since leaving Gaza, Beirut, etc., you've spoken about the trauma of witnessing families being torn apart, people dying and starving. What does, quote, after look like for a journalist who has reported from inside a genocide? Do you have rituals for leaving the work at the door, or does it just live in your body now? And what support, if any, do journalists covering this receive for their own mental health? How do you balance the heaviness in order to keep going?
I think journalism in and of itself is extremely cathartic. I think part of life feels more meaningful when you do get real about the fact that just because you've witnessed something and it is traumatic, you become stronger and you realize your trauma pales and in a way to other people's trauma that you've witnessed, and that becomes a self-healing process because what you understand is the truth, which is that, okay, I do need therapy. I go to that. I do need to have rituals. I have them. That looks a lot like, uh, affirmations. It looks a lot like drawing. I draw. I actually just do art therapy with myself, writing, uh, and of course, like hanging out with my friends and being in the world. But I think the process of journalism of doing interviews with people who are experiencing trauma makes you feel like you are using your body to actively do something about it. There's no other medicine, I think, that works quite as well as hitting publish on a story that talks about a Salwa in Syria, that talks about an organization in Beirut passing 1,000 meals out, talking about a glia, talking about an ES with the HIV. There is nothing more healing than feeling like I am a part of the problem solving. And yeah, I do think that's not everyone is capable of that. A lot of my lived experiences growing up, going to Beirut, being jailed for doing advocacy in Palestine and being jailed for it, experiencing war firsthand, experiencing my own heart disease. I was born with a heart disease that I've had to treat my whole life. All of these things have made my mind quite strong. And, even when it's not strong, I know exactly what to do to get back to myself because I've had so much lived experience working through trauma and coming back from it that I actually really relate to my sources and they relate to my stories. And in that way, the process is itself its own mechanism for making me feel alive, honestly, and making me feel like my whole life doesn't have to be huge, but it can be meaningful nonetheless. And so I hope that explains. I think journalists just need to be like not the celebrities. I don't think celebrities should exist at all, really, in the way that they do now. But I think if you follow the sources and you exalt and amplify journalists that you really like their work and you just really thank them for their work because it does take a lot of hard, it's hard. It is all worth it in the end. Like you don't, I don't think we don't need much, but appreciation and knowing that someone read your stuff and knows about a Salwa or an ES, like that heals. That's very healing to me.
I think we probably just have time for maybe one or two questions,
Let
but
me be
um,
quick in my answers.
no, I mean, there's such like robust answers that we need. I feel like I'm getting so much just from your answers, just as much as the questions themselves and the presentations. But so someone asked, you've shared some really beautiful personal stories and amplified helpers who are making a real impact. By amplifying these stories, I'm sure in addition to getting direct donations, you're also changing public opinion or possibly, quote, decision makers. Can you speak a bit about the nuance of supporting slash enacting systemic changes via reporting on small personal stories? Do you think of some reporters slash roles as being more on the systemic side and yours being more personal, or is this a false dichotomy I'm drawing?
No, it's like interesting that you bring this up. I like this question. I think it just matters I think what really matters is the story itself. I think personal stories can have systemic change, actually. I think that a lot of and like storytelling can change public opinion and it just depends, right? For like the Epstein files, for instance, like how do we even know about them? It's because of a reporter who took the stories of victims and really went into them, really believed them, really like unfolded them bit by bit as much as they possibly could. And now at this level, like we don't even think I know it's awful, but we like really, I don't personally even think many people associate the Epstein files with the victims themselves, even though that was the reason why we're all talking about the Epstein files. It's because it came from a reporter who was doing this work. They were doing storytelling because you can't really make systemic change without witnesses being on the record. You can't really get to the level of being like, okay, and ultimately what happened with the Epstein files is that they got to a national level. Yes, of course, we're like nowhere near getting any of them, getting most of them out, but like the steps they happen, right? And I think that it's not a false dichotomy. It's just that you have to marry the two. One comes before the next. Like the witnesses who you're amplifying, the problem solvers, the women that were like, I was a victim of this person in his ring, and I was a victim, and now I'm trying to solve the problem for so many victims by coming out and speaking out and putting my story on the record. Like that causes systemic change. So it's not that there's a dichotomy here, it's that they actually are extremely important together.
Um, so I think the last, or like there's a couple questions that I'm thinking we can maybe merge as something that comes later in the resources, because someone's asking about which independent journalists do you recommend? So maybe you can send over some
Hmm?
trusted sources that we can just include on the resource page. Someone's also, asking, what do you recommend for people beyond, just engaging on social media or quote, being angry on the internet. Um, so I'm wondering, I mean, if you want to say a couple words about that now, you can, and also maybe just something that we can include in the resource list for folks to keep getting engaged with. I'm hoping also this living toolkit will be something that we can keep getting engaged with, keep building upon. But yeah, interested to hear
Yeah.
your thoughts.
Yeah, I have a whole list of people and I'll try to remember them. But ultimately, it is about independent creators, ones that have had experience in the industry, actually. Like, I think it's a lot of the ones of us who have defected from mainstream media because it makes us have the ethical. We really can, we've proved it. Like, we were in the system and we were taught all of the technical skills of what really being a journalist is because there was enough training involved. There was enough real like putting our getting our hands dirty and then also experiencing challenges, experiencing being getting our voices sort of suppressed. And you'll find people like Samira Mohadeen of she's a really good journalist on Iran. She has her own show. I think it's called On the Line Media. You have Ken Klippenstein, who just has so many sources inside of the government and in people who defect from the American government. You have people on Dropsite. Dropsite is a great place. The Intercept is a great place. Zeteo is a great place. Uh, you know, what's happening now is that we're in transition. And so this question is extremely important because the truth is there isn't a very clean answer. The answer is that you have to do the work that you're doing right now. You're literally here doing this work as we speak, learning who I am. And I'm just one of thousands of amazing people who are trying their best to tell real stories. And the fact of the matter is the work you're doing now is the work we have to do together, which is transition from a dependence on mainstream media and also kind of moving away from influencer coverage, which is not real reporting. There's a lot of influencers who say great things, and I will defend their right to advocate and be amazing at changing a public opinion. But when it comes down to it, there's a certain journalism is like a real profession. It takes real experience. You really will get caught up. Like influencers who do on the ground reporting or try get caught up in propaganda. I've seen it 1,000 times. They just don't know what they're doing and they take the best story first. And the best story is often just propaganda because it's being served to you. So I think to really tie this in a bow, you're doing the work now. I'll try to share a list, but there is no list that's comprehensive. It's about what resonates with you, how you pursue the truth is a hygiene that we're all kind of getting better at and we're all trying to perfect. There is no perfection, but yeah, all these people exist on social media. They exist on Substack, they exist on Patreon, but they also exist through your own network. And so I really just appreciate you being here because that's a part of the building of your sort of, your toolkit is really coming to things like this.
Thank you so much, Afeef, like for your time, for your heart, for your reporting, for your work, for this body of work that you've built and the voices that you're amplifying. I felt, and I'm sure a lot of people felt this way too, just really both humbled and empowered by the work that you've done, and makes me feel really inspired to, yeah, makes hopefully create some more material changes with our storytelling and everything that we do. So I just want to thank you so, so much for being here.
I
I'm
appreciate
gonna
you so much.
literally, we're so honored. And Paloma is just gonna close us out with a few kind of important notes for us to take with us.
Thank you, Nicole. And again, thank you, Afeef. Thank you all. So before we go, I just want to take a moment to really acknowledge what we've built here, not just over the last 3 months, but in every moment that y'all showed up with presence and curiosity and care that each and every one of you brought into this space. So, for us, this was never just a class. Like Nicole said, this is a living, breathing thing that we've created together. And even though tonight is our final gathering in this form, what we've practiced here doesn't end. It travels with you, it changes shape, it keeps going. So hold it close, keep playing, keep building, and keep a lookout for the follow-up materials, including worksheets for tonight's class, the list of resources that Afeef was just mentioning, that video, if y'all are interested in seeing the rest of that, we'll also share that, as well as a survey about the course, which we would appreciate if you would take. It helps us out a lot, and maybe we can do more of these. So CCR and Treehouse would like to just give a tremendous thank you to all of our instructors, Afeef Nessouli, Afeni Evans, Phoenix Storm, and JP Hill. Thank you so much for holding us down tenderly and powerfully. And again, to each and every one of you, thank you for trusting us, for showing up, and for being a part of Rooted, a living toolkit in the face of state oppression. See you again soon.